Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to this edition of the Monday Majlis, which is a delightful one. I'm very, very happy indeed to have Zahra as our guest. We have been organizing this for years now with her. She's in Iran, and I met her in Dublin. As it happens, Zohar Hadromialush and we are writing a book on the devil, and Zohar organized a workshop on demons, good and bad. To make this even more spicy, it was at the Trinity College, and on the day of Halloween. So that was good fun, and I heard some amazing talks, including that of Zahra, and I was absolutely sure I would like to invite Zahra. That talk was on how one of the pre-Islamic Arabic goddesses was transformed into a black-faced demon in the tradition, and I think that that shows already, that leads us to her scholarship today. But I'd like Zahra to talk first, as usual, about herself and her own trajectory, and then to get into the topic of the day. Zahra, please.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good time. Thank you all for being here, and I appreciate you very much for giving your time to me. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to be with you all. Also, I would like to thank dear Ishtawan for inviting me to this Majlis. I hope to provide you with some valuable and helpful insights. My name is Zahra Mohaghegian. I am 39 years old. I'm originally from Iran, Isfahan city, and resided in this city until the age of 32. Isfahan is an ancient city with a rich history dating back to BC times, and currently is the third most populous city in Iran after Tehran and Mashhad. I completed all of my education in Isfahan, and subsequently, after finishing my PhD in 2015, I relocated to Tehran due to my job at the Institute for Humanities and Cultural Studies, firstly as a researcher, and then as an assistant professor of Quranic studies. If I want to tell you about the path that led me to our current discussion, namely the masculine God, I must mention that first spark of this discussion, or the beginning of my self-awareness in this realm, commenced during my master's studies, approximately 15 years ago. During that time, I had just entered the community and had just begun to explore or experience different social environments. I grew up in a family where both men and women were treated equally. My parents didn't show any discriminations toward me, my brothers, and me, and I was accustomed to equality. But as I delved into society and got different experiences, I gradually realized the existence of gender disparities. I realized that women lack the same rights and opportunities as men. I think it's better to go back a little more. I grew up in a religious family. During my childhood and teenage years, I managed to memorize the Quran with the help of my mother. At that time, around 20 or 30 years ago, Quran memorization wasn't very common. So those of us who could do it were highly regarded and respected. Yet there was a noticeable inequality between girls and boys. I observed that boys easily appeared on television and radio programs or in different religious circles, reciting the Quran unhindered and without restrictions or limitations, or they participate in international competitions or have various meetings with politicians and high officials and many other benefits and privileges. Whereas girls like me were confined to group recitations, or limited to segregated setting, devoid of male presence. The way girls were treated was not at all comparable to boys, and even now it is almost the same. Anyway, this discrimination was very annoying to me during my teenage years and penetrated deep into my being or my subconscious. Later, I entered universities and studied statistics. During my studies, I participated in courses focused on professional recitation of the Quran and took part in numerous regional and national Quranic competitions. Through these experiences, I gained expertise in various aspects of Quranic recitation, such as different melodies, tajweed rules, Arabic letter pronunciation, and other related areas. As a result, I received multiple honors and awards in Quranic competitions. This period of intense involvement with the Quran sparked me desire to further my education in Quranic studies. I wanted to deepen my understanding of verses I had memorized and recited. I aim to establish a profound connection or deep spiritual relationship with the Quran. This led me to pursue my master's degree in Quranic studies. As my engagement in social activities grew, which included teaching at universities and various institutions, I directly observed the marginalization and exclusion of women in academic and scientific settings. It was strange to me that these spaces are mainly occupied by men, and as a result, women were deprived of such positions and opportunities, mostly without any reason. Moreover, during that period, even I encountered instances of gender discriminations and biases in these environments. Anyway, in 2009, I finished my master's degree, and it was at this time that I was introduced to Amina Wadud book, The Quran and Women. I read it with great eagerness and pleasure. At that time, this book answered many of my questions about social discrimination and taught me how patriarchal interpretations have influenced the societal norms of the country or the society in which I live. It became evident to me that male dominance in interpreting the Quran has perpetuated these discriminatory practices. At that time, I thought that because women have or had withdrawn from the interpretation of the Quran, or at least their voice had not been left in the history of interpretation, men had been able to establish their authority in the interpretation and then confiscate or manipulate the Quran for their own benefits. I felt that women's voices were marginalized in Quranic interpretation. Therefore, I came to believe that it was crucial for women, including myself, to interpret the Quran or offer interpretations from a female perspective to challenge traditional views that shaped by male authority. As I pursued my PhD studies, I delving deeper into Quranic studies and exploring diverse historical perspectives. I broadened my understanding. I began to recognize that the Quran itself may reflect biases against women, and it seemed to me that the Quran itself apparently has some problems with us women. When I joined the Institute for Humanities and Cultural Studies in Tehran, I made the decision to focus my research on gender issues of the Quran in order to extract masculine dimensions of the Quran and highlight this part of the Quran, of course, with the help of scientific methods, especially historical approach. On the other hand, novelty and innovation in the approach were very important to me. So I read a lot and searched a lot until finally I decided to advance my feminist critiques from the path of mythological symbols and psychoanalytical perspective. My aim was to uncover the unconscious layer of the Quran by using symbolic interpretation, comparative mythology, and psychoanalytical analysis. As a matter of fact, by mixing historical insights with psychological perspectives, I sought to demonstrate that firstly, the Quran should be considered in all its dimensions, all its aspects as a historical text, not just in certain parts. Secondly, the unconscious layer of the Quran, which is natural and original, is patriarchal. My first book, published in Persian in 2020, explored sex and sexual mythological elements in the Quran, particularly by focusing on the portrayal of Mother Earth in the Quran. My intention was to demonstrate how the concept of the Great Mother is employed in the Quran to emphasize the supremacy of Allah and his power and elevate his position. Continuing my journey in 2018 and 2019, I reached the Arabian goddesses, namely Allāh, Al-Uzza, and Manat. These deities are referenced in the Quran both explicitly and implicitly many times. And firstly, based on my knowledge of Islamic tradition and accounts that were provided by Muslim scholars, I perceived these goddesses as simple idols of wood or stone. I thought that they served as intermediaries and subordinate to Allah in the pre-Islamic era. So I thought the Quran does not say or does not have much about them, especially for a feminist critic. However, during the lockdown due to COVID-19, I made a significant discovery, of course, in my mind. I realized that the narrative of Islamic tradition about these goddesses was just one perspective, only one narration, one version of the story. And there are other accounts of their lives that are more accurate and reveal a different story than what the tradition said to us. This important point or this realization marked a crucial turning point for me as a feminist scholar, challenging existing beliefs and broadening my comprehension of the topic. As a result, this newfound insight compelled me to dedicate my focus on this subject and leading me to the creation of the present presentation approximately 2 years ago. Of course, I must note that this presentation and the information I am sharing today with you is a verbal form of an article slated for publication in the Arabica journal. So for a more comprehensive exploration of this presentation, you will be able to access the detailed version in the upcoming months within the Arabica journal. This was a synopsis of my journey to this article, and I hope you find it interesting.
Thank you, Zahra. It is very, very interesting. Sorry, everyone. Could you please tell me that? Can you see me side by my screen, me side by side, Zahra, all the time, or you can see Zahra on her own? Because I'm seeing myself, and I'm not that happy with that. So are we both on your screens at the same time? Okay. Then I will probably just, yeah, switch my camera off. Yeah, it's strange. I don't know how to. I was trying to remove myself from the screen, but I didn't know how. Okay. Let's see whether I have got any advice in. Okay. So when Zahra was talking, you could see only her. That's good. That's good then. Okay. Thank you. Then we are okay. Zahra, could you please go on? We will have we can ask questions about from Zahra about everything, but that will be after the presentation, and then we will switch off the recording. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I share my PDF, my presentation first of all. Yes. It is visible for you. Can you see my? Okay, I started.
I can.
So. Okay. The Quran and its masculine gods, a historical feminist analysis. In the late 20th century, particularly in the 1990s, a movement began to take shape among some Muslim women worldwide, seeking to reclaim their rights. Drawing upon their newly acquired literacy and growing social engagement, these women deployed all their Quranic knowledge to navigate the challenges posed by their changing everyday lives in the face of modernity. Some of these women who called for the revival of ijtihad, namely individual investigation of the sacred text, pointed out that the Quran had granted them certain rights that were being withheld from them in practice, often in the name of Islam and in the hands of Muslim men. This new Islamic feminism caused a shift from the initial focus on women's rights within the Islamic domain to a wider focus on the Quranic text itself, as well as gender equality and social justice as interrelated fundamental principles within the Quran. A variety of approaches began to emerge in the feminist interpretation of this group. Some highlighted those Quranic verses in which the equality between men and women is made explicit. Proponents of this approach claim that the Quran recognizes the equality of men and women and differentiates human beings only based on piety or God-worthiness, regardless of their gender. Moreover, they believe that obtaining an accurate interpretation of the Quran requires adopting a holistic, non-selective view of the Quran. According to their belief, one needs to adopt a historical perspective that allows for a distinction between particular Quranic verses and universal verses. In this way, one will be able to identify an egalitarian system in the underlying layer of the text. Nevertheless, these scholars have failed to consistently adhere to their assumptions in practice. As a result, they couldn't provide a full-fledged scholarly and accurate analysis of the entirety of the Quran and women's place within it. This has made their views seem to impose modern concepts such as gender equality onto the Quran. The main flaw in the works of these feminist exegetes comes to light when they resort to the Quranic principle of monotheism, namely Tawheed, and use it as a basis to infer the equality of all human beings as creatures of one gender-free God. More precisely speaking, when discussing the supernatural beings of the Quran, most prominently Allah, they happen to ignore the alleged exegetical principles and hold that Allah is gender-free God, goes beyond the 7th century Arabian context, and is about the cultural and historical issues of the time. In this presentation, I consider the historical dimensions of Allah within the Quran. I focus on those Quranic verses that are concerning Allah's conflict with its feminine rivals, that are Allāh, Al-Uzza, and Manat. As we will see, given these verses, Allah and its gender-related characteristics have a prominent role to play here. And contrary to what Islamic feminists say, Allah is not trans-historical. Instead, it is a powerful masculine God that has reached the position of the unique supreme God through repression and destruction. By gaining insights, we can establish a foundation for a profound fundamental rereading of feminist studies of the Quran. Before delving into the relevant Quranic verses, it is imperative to be introduced briefly to the context of the Arabia on the brink of the emergence of Islam, especially the pre-Islamic place of these deities, namely Allah and the three goddesses. Here we review some important presumptions. 1. According to modern Quranic studies, on the brink of Islam, Hijaz society was a quasi-monotheistic society in which male and female deities were venerated simultaneously within a multiple system. But in the hands of the Quran, this turned into an exclusivist monotheistic system, also on a gradual basis. Number 2, Contrary to Islamic sources, various modern studies have suggested that Muhammad's opponents were not idolaters in the primitive sense of the term. Indeed, they did not worship stone or wooden idols. Rather, they were in more sophisticated stages of polytheism. This means that their deities were abstract divine entities, something similar to Allah. On this account, Allāh, Al-Uzza, and Manat could possibly be goddesses rather than idols. Number 3. Another major point is that archaeological evidence traces the history of these three goddesses back to the period before Christ's birth. While archaeologically speaking, Allah is not that old. Apparently, Allah replaced Hubal and was chosen as a supreme god, supreme deity of Mecca and the Kaaba only after Meccan victory over Abyssinians in 552 years AD. That is around 20 years before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. Therefore, Allah is very young and new, while these goddesses are very old and ancient. Number 4. In the periods prior to the rise of Islam, the place of these goddesses began to decline as far as in the Prophet's era. None of these goddesses was deemed the supreme or first-ranking deities. Instead, male deities were considered superior to female deities. In any event, it is certain that these goddesses were in decline at the advent of Islam, but this did not necessarily imply their subordination to Allah. In other words, until the revelation of the Qur'an, all three were still recognized and venerated as independent deities in a strong position, albeit lower than that of Allah and other male deities. With the above hypertextual remarks, let us now turn to the Quranic text to pinpoint the process of Quranic repression of the goddesses through Quranic verses and themes. The first major point is that the Quran explicitly names these goddesses. To be more precise, also there were a number of diverse male and female deities in pre-Islamic era which were worshipped by Arabs. The Quran singles out only the three goddesses, Allāh, Al-Uzza, and Manat, warning the polytheists against them, something it does not do in the case of male deities, as I explain more in the following. This might suggest that these goddesses were Allah's main rivals in the Quranic monotheistic system. Through a reflection on various Quranic verses, we can recapitulate the main relevant themes as follows. The first and most prominent Quranic verses concerning Allah's confrontation with these goddesses appear in Surah An-Najm, chapter 53, where Allah is explicitly contrasted with these goddesses, as you can see on the screen. These verses occur in Meccan Surah, which the Islamic tradition presents as revealed 5 years after the beginning of Muhammad's prophetic mission. This Quranic chapter, namely Surah An-Najm, originally aims to criticize and condemn the polytheism. The opening verses through verse 18 are responses to accusations raised by the polytheists against Muhammad to the effect that he deviated and was influenced by an entity other than Allah. Verse 19 begins to address the goddesses. While traditional exegetes and modern Quranic scholars have interpreted the verb seeing, ra'a, in the verse 19 as contemplation on the power of those goddesses, it seems more plausible to take it at face value by interpreting it as seeing with one's physical eyes. So, just as Muhammad had seen Allah with his physical eyes in the course of two spiritual experiences, the polytheists were called or even challenged to see their deities with their physical eyes, namely Allah, Al-Uzza, and Manat. In keeping with the above remarks about the pre-Islamic status of these three goddesses and their abstract character, not their idolic nature, this challenge or tahaddi seems reasonable. Another Quranic theme associated with these three goddesses is the belief that they were daughters of Allah or Banatullah, as you can see on the screen. The implicit thematic structure of these verses gives the impression that the polytheists perceived and worshipped these goddesses as daughters of Allah or Banatullah. In a polemical approach, such attribution to Allah is an unfair division. However, in pre-Islamic sources, both written and physical sources, there is no evidence of Allah's, Al-Uzza and Manat being Allah's daughters, whether collectively or in pairs or even individually. Indeed, as noted before, pre-Islamic evidence demonstrates that these three goddesses were independent of Allah, and although they were of a lower status in relation to Allah, they were by no means subordinates of Allah or at its service. We should therefore ask, what is meant by these verses, or who are addressed by these verses? I will return to these questions later. Another title that the Quran gives to these goddesses can be seen in verse 23 of Surah An-Najm again. This verse states that Allah, Al-Uzza, and Manat are merely empty names. In hiya illa asma'un sammaytumuha antum wa aba'ukum. These goddesses are merely empty names without having any divinity or power. مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ بِهَا مِنْ سُلْطَانٍ. This verse implies that what the polytheists expected from them following their ancestors is neither confirmed by Allah nor is it buttressed by a good reason. This verse asserts that guidance only comes through obedience of Allah rather than those goddesses. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. As pointed out before, in Surah An-Najm, the polytheists are accused of worshipping the triple goddesses as daughters of Allah. Moreover, there are other Quranic verses, such as what you see on the screen, in which the veneration of Allah's daughters is equated with veneration of jinn, an entity lower than angels. The upshot is that from a Quranic perspective, veneration of these goddesses is treated like that of jinns, which means that the Quran at this time or here recognize these three at most as jinns or something in their position. Why? What are the meanings and implications of treating these goddesses as jinns? There is no answer to this question in Islamic sources. Furthermore, there is no confirmation of this idea that these goddesses were jinns or had any connection with them in pre-Islamic sources. In Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, veneration of these goddesses is treated like that of a shaitan. Therefore, shaitan is another title that the Quran gives to these goddesses. These verses are concerned with polytheism, shirk, verse 116. Then they refer to these goddesses as some females, inatha, which implies humiliation, verses 170. These phrases are structured in ways that veneration of these goddesses is taken on a par with worshipping Satan or shaitan. إِلَّا إِنَاثًا وَإِنْ يَدْعُونَ إِلَّا شَيْطَانًا مَرِيدًا. It goes on to assert that the rituals performed by the polytheists in honor of their goddesses were indeed acts of obedience to Satan. Thus, also in Surah An-Najm and other Quranic verses, these goddesses were treated as Allah's rivals or Allah's daughters or jinn or empty names, but in these verses, they are assigned a much lower status, or Satan as a Satan or as his helpers and puppets. The above were the major cases in which the Quranic perspective on the triple goddesses is revealed. In addition, there are numerous other verses in which implicit references are made to these goddesses, but the above shall suffice. On the whole, we can conclude that also the Quran begins with a recognition of three goddesses as serious rivals of Allah. It goes on to attribute to them a host of identities, such as Allah's daughters or Banatullah, angels, empty names, jinns, and shayateen, which do not square with the first identification. Furthermore, each of these identities is surrounded by remarkable ambiguities, and their link to these goddesses is not known because they are not confirmed by pre-Islamic evidence. We should therefore ask, what sense can we make of this encounter, and what is implied by these various identifications? To be more precise, what is the basis or criterion of such attributions or identifications in the Quran? An analysis, now we reach to an analysis on the encounter between Allah and the goddesses in the Quran. Given the different Quranic verses in which numerous curious features are attributed to these three goddesses, it seems that a process can be identified within them, a gradual process that tends to be polemic in character, degrading the status of these goddesses in the Quranic power hierarchy in 4 or 5 stages. The first stage. Considering the evidence of all sorts, it seems that the first stage of the Quranic polemic approach to the goddesses venerated by the polytheists is that these goddesses enter the henotheistic realm of Allah, and by a compromise between the Quran and the polytheists, they are degraded to the status of Allah's daughters. As a matter of fact, the Quran uses the term banat or daughters in a metaphorical, figurative, and allegorical way to show the angelic or angel-like position of these goddesses, and hence their subordination to Allah. This is to say that instead of being degraded to lower subordinate deities as was prevalent in ancient religious systems, these triple goddesses were completely excluded from the realm of creatorship and downgraded to the rank of the assistants and agents of the omnipotent or supreme deity, namely Allah. In fact, the place previously assigned to angels is now assigned to Allāh, Al-Uzza, and Manat. It seems that the Qur'anic characterization of goddesses as God's daughters or as angels derive from the dominant monotheistic traditions that existed in the region prior to the revelation of the Quran. The most prominent of them are the Jewish tradition and the Zoroastrian tradition. Due to time constraints, I choose to delve into the specific. I choose not to delve into the specifics of this discussion. The second stage, as suggested by many Quranic scholars, following an indeterminate period of time, possibly several months or even several years, the polytheists forgot the subordinate angelic position of their goddesses, that is, their place as Allah's daughters, and began reverting to the worship of these three deities as equals of Allah. As Christian Robbins says, the polytheists draw on the prima facie polytheistic implication of the phrase Banatullah to remind deity-like rather than angelic lineage of these goddesses. In this way, the polytheistic system, which was prevalent in the pre-Islamic period, was resumed. For this reason, verses of An-Najm, namely verse 19 to 21, reprehend them and abrogated the position of Allah's daughters, which it had previously assigned them. Moreover, in a polemic approach, the Quran represented the label Banatullah as a physical and non-allegorical belief in order to deride the polytheistic practice, and accordingly pave the path for the abolishment of such attribution. The third stage, a survey of Quranic verses shows that the gradual process of repressing the goddesses and the Quranic polemic against the polytheists do not end here. Indeed, these goddesses are further degraded and humiliated over time. As we see in Surah Al-An'am, chapter 7, and Surah Saba, the worship of the goddesses expressed here in monotheistic terms as angels is taken to be on a par with the worship of jinn, so that the polytheists know that the place of their deities in the Quranic power hierarchy is lower than that of angels, and know they are equal to jinn, that is, divine creatures with the minimum of power. Thus, in this period, the goddesses are merely recognized as equal to jinn and are not much proximate to Allah. The fourth stage, verse 23 of Surah An-Najm, which was revealed in Medina and was then inserted in An-Najm, refers to another encounter with these goddesses in the Quran. In this verse, the goddesses are said to be empty names and lack any identity whatsoever, as Allah's daughters, angels, or even jinn, and lack any power, and therefore are useless. The fifth stage. It seems that verses 117 onwards of Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, which were revealed in the early Medinan period after the liberation of Muslims from persecutions of the polytheists, refer to the final stage of the process or polemic. Here, the Quran explicitly states that worship of these goddesses is indeed worship of a shaitan, which is to say that their followers are indeed followers of Satan or shaitan. These verses go on to say that the rituals performed by the polytheists for those female goddesses are indeed acts of obedience to Shaitan. In this way, since the polytheists insisted on their position and failed to observe the compromise, the Quranic encounter with these three goddesses ended in the declaration that they were evil or satanic. Here also, it is noteworthy that demonization of false deities is a theme that is found in the Bible as well. This is a culmination of the Quranic identification to the biblical patterns, establishing the Quran as a fully exclusivist and masculine religion. And finally, conclusion. As we have seen, the power structure in the Quran is deeply influenced by the prevalent masculine monotheistic traditions in the region, elevating the stature of the highest local deity, namely Allah, by marginalizing and then demolishing the other deities' sanctuaries. Thus, in contrast to what Muslim feminists suggest, the Quranic God is not a gender-free and trans-historical entity. On the contrary, as demonstrated by the verses overviewed in this presentation, it is a clearly masculine entity that does not share its power with any feminine divinity, just like the God of the other monotheistic religions of the Abrahamic tradition. Moreover, according to the relevant Quranic verses, this God took over the supreme divine position by dominating and defeating female deities. Accordingly, there is no partnership or interaction between the Quranic God and female deities. Indeed, there was no mutual relationship between Allah and three goddesses in the Quran, as Allah's ability was revealed by dominating and overcoming these deities. Obviously, such a contrast results in a theory of subordination for females, in which men are deemed superior or the self and women as inferior or the other. Furthermore, such a power structure has many other repercussions which should be tackled in another studies. On the whole, the research in this article shows that the supranational beings within the Quran, like those of Judaism and Christianity, play an important role in the feministic issues of the Islam. A study of the beings also has a crucial impact on significant problems such as the status of women in Islamic cultures from the past to the present. All this shows that feminine and feministic analysis of the Quran should not be confined to ready-made definitions and notions, such as transgender character of the God of the Quran, even though they might seem harmless or even useful. Indeed, the Quran is a discourse that emerged within a particular historical context, making it a reflection of the conceptions and gender dynamics prevalent during that specific period. It is essential to recognize that these generated dynamics depicted in the text may differ from those of other periods in which the Quran has been interpreted. In light of this, if Islamic feminism is to be a step toward gender justice and equality, it might be crucial for its proponents to take this point into consideration. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Zahra, for this very most impressive talk and presentation. I will switch off the recording now, and we can enter into the question and answers session.